Israel et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat L'Dorotam berit olam Ki sheshet yamim Asa Adonai et ha-Shamayim v'et Haaretz v'shamru V'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat L'Dorotam berit olam Ubayom hashvi Shabbat v'nafash Shabbat v'nafash Shabbat v'nafash v'shamru V'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat Lasod et ha-Shabbat L'Dorotam berit olam Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Borei peri hagafen Amen. L'chaim. So, if you can't tell, my voice is pretty weak. I feel fine. I feel great. But somehow, I talk a lot. Gesundheit. And my vocal cords are not in great shape. So, I can't really raise my voice so well. So, I hope you can hear me okay. We'll have to have some help reading all the sources maybe. One of the other options for the class would be to have more discussion and have more of your voices talk. Don't worry, things haven't gotten that bad. Things haven't gotten that bad. So, trying to preserve what I have left for the next two B'nai Mitzvah today. So it's going to be a long day, but hopefully we'll make it. Let's begin with the blessing for the study of Torah, and then we'll get in it. Ken, I know how from you are. Chas v'shalom, you should miss the blessing. Okay, ready? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Okay, so the source sheets, there should be plenty today. We're a smaller group today. If you're watching at home, they should be online where they always are. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm not getting any texts yet. Well, maybe. Hopefully we're online fine. Good?
There's always a reason to complain.
Yeah. Last week we had some trouble with the video, but God willing, it is fixed now. So hopefully you're at home and you have the source sheets. Our Torah portion is Kitisa, which is like the best story in Exodus once you finish the story. Once you have the story of Passover is over, and then you get into the other parts of Exodus, building this and building that, and it's not really much of a narrative anymore. Then comes along this fascinating story about the golden calf. So we're not really going to read the part about the golden calf. We're going to read about the aftermath of the golden calf. Last night, I spoke about it. Unlikely that you heard that speech, but it's available. You can go back and watch it online. And we talked about, the three groups of people who felt the repercussions of the golden calf. So if I told you the three groups of people who felt the repercussions, there was one group that was rewarded and their status was elevated. And that group is made up of two types of people. There's one group that was punished and all the perpetrators were killed and got the death penalty. And there's a third group who was forgiven and not punished. Okay? So who's who? Now, if you were there last night, you heard the answer, so don't blurt it out. But who was rewarded? The Levites, because the Levites didn't participate, and the women. Because the women didn't sin. They weren't punished. By the way, the women also didn't sin with the sin of the spies, which is why women don't need to be fixed when they're born like men do, or boys do, and that's why boys have circumcision and women don't need anything because women are born perfect because they're not connected to those sins the way men are. The Levites still need to be circumcised, but then Moses was born circumcised, and it's a whole different conversation. Who was punished and killed? 3,000 ringleaders, who were the ones who actually built it. And who was forgiven, and nothing happened to them as a result of this sin? Everybody else. Everybody else was forgiven. Now, when they sinned with the spies, there was a tremendous punishment. The punishment was you're going to have to wander in the wilderness for 40 years until you die, and you're not going to get to go into the land of Israel. But after the sin of the golden calf, they're still on a direct path to go to Israel, and they're forgiven. So that's like an interesting idea. Now, today what I'd like to look at is how that forgiveness came about, and what we can learn from it, because I think there's an amazing lesson that we can take from it in our own lives that's very powerful. Now, the story of the golden calf is always read around Purim. And there's an amazing connection that I learned from Rabbi Ari Kahn, who's my favorite teacher that I listen to. And he came up with this idea. And I took his idea and came up with another idea. And you can decide what you think about both of them. I'm telling you, though, his idea is amazing. My idea is, we'll see. But what he came up with is very special, and I hope that you'll appreciate it. And the connection that he made to Purim is really fascinating. Now, I'm going to give it away a little bit. Let's take a look at, I want to look at two groupings of verses, starting with, so we're in Exodus 33, beginning with 17. Oh, I actually have Plout because I forgot my book. So I can tell you it's on page 658. 658. If you have Plout. If not, it's Exodus 33, verse 17. Okay? And just a reminder one more time that if you speak, please use the mic. There are a couple mics available. So that the people at home can hear you. And also, if you speak into the mic, make sure that the mic's on, because it works better. It works better. It's more effective. All right. Okay, Norman, here we go. Chapter 33 of Exodus, verse 17. Now, just to remind you, we're in the aftermath of the golden calf. Okay, here we go. And the Lord said to Moses, verse 17. Oh, wait, is it 30? Sorry, I'm losing my mind. No, it is 33. I'm 100.
33:17.
Yeah. And the Lord said to Moses?
And the Eternal One said to Moses, I will also do this thing that you have asked, for you have truly gained my favor, and I have singled you out by name. He said, Oh, let me behold your presence. And God answered, I will make all my goodness pass before you, and I will proclaim before you the name Eternal. And the grace that I grant and the compassion that I show, continuing, but you cannot see my face, for a human being may not see me and live. And the Eternal said, See, there is a place near me. Station yourself on the rock, and as my presence passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock and shield you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will take my hand away, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen.
Okay, so God basically is on the mountain. God puts him in the cleft of the rock. He turns around, passes by. Once he passes by, Moses is able to look at him. Rashi says he sees the knot of tefillin on the back of God's head. If you've bought tefillin recently, it used to be a good set of tefillin. A kosher set of tefillin, like the worst kind, would be like $200. Now they start at around $500. Imagine, so this is God's tefillin. Pricey. Right, you know. So he sees that. And what exactly means by seeing is to fill in that, this whole story is a little bizarre. Why Moses would even ask, and it would take us a long time and a lot of Kabbalah to try to figure out what Moses was interested in and why he wanted to see him and why he couldn't and so forth. But it's what happens, and there's something that happens because of this that's really fascinating. And when we look at that, what happens because of it, then we see a connection to Purim. Okay, now, how else did I want to say it? He's about to, what happens right after this is Moses is going to come down with the second set of tablets, right? If you look at verse 1 of chapter 34, Lord said to Moses, carve 2 tablets of stone like the first, and I will inscribe upon the tablets the words that were on the first tablets, which you shattered. Remember, you broke them. Okay, so that being said, I want to now skip to after Moses writes down the commandments. Verse 29, chapter 34, verse 29. Chapter 34, Exodus, verse 29. On Plowed, it's on page 661. Okay, you have it? 661, verse 29. So all I'm skipping are some of the things that, rewriting the Ten Commandments and, a little bit of a regurgitation of those. Not the least of which, after the story of the golden calf, is you shall, if you look in verse 17, you shall not make molten gods for yourself. So that one's not going that well. Right.
So Moses came down from Mount Sinai. And as Moses came down from the mountain, bearing the 2 tablets of the pact, Moses was not aware that the skin of his face was radiant, since he had spoken with God. Aaron and all the Israelites saw the skin of Moses' face was radiant, and they shrank from coming near him. But Moses called to them, and Aaron and all the chieftains in the assembly returned to him, and Moses spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near, and he instructed them concerning all that Adonai had imparted to him on Mount Sinai. And when Moses had finished speaking with them, he put a veil over his face.
COVID. They thought it was COVID.
Whenever Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he would leave the veil off until he came out. And when he came out and told the Israelites that what he had been commanded, the Israelites would see how radiant the skin of Moses' face was. Moses would then put the veil back over his face until he went in to speak with him.
Okay, so someone must have told Moses, you got some sun up there, right? You look a little different. Why did someone need to tell him that? Obviously figured it out because he started wearing a mask. Not because of an airborne disease, but because he was radiant, right? So if you look at verse 29, and this is where a lot of interesting things happen here. Even if you don't know much Hebrew, I just want to read the last part of the verse. Umoshe lo yada, Moses did not know, ki keren or panav, that the skin of his face was keren. Right, or karan here. But in modern Hebrew, the word is also pronounced, here it's written karan correctly, but the word also is keren. Now, bedabro, it's not an easy word to say, bedabro, ito, since he had spoken with God. So Moses comes down, and his face is keren. Now, keren is a Hebrew word that means about 12 things. Have any of you ever heard of the JNF, Jewish National Fund? Anyone know what it is in Hebrew? Close. So in Hebrew, in English, the Jewish National Fund, JNF. In Hebrew, Kuf Kuf Lamed, or KKL. Karen Kayemet Liasod. Right? Right. Karen Kayemet Liasod. I think most people call it Liasod. All right, we'll Google it later. So a Karen can mean like a fund, right? But Karen can also be a ray, like a ray of light. And that's how it's generally translated here. But it can also mean, a horn. Now, in the Vulgate, which is the Latin translation of the Old Testament, or what we would call the Tanakh or Hebrew Bible, in the Vulgate, or of the Torah, it's translated there as horn. And so when Michelangelo read the Vulgate, he saw Moses had a horn. And there was a pope named Julius II who commissioned a statue from Michelangelo of Moses. And it came when Michelangelo said, oh, well, what do we know about how Moses looks like? Oh, he has got horns. So that didn't go well for us historically. Actually, when I was in Rome last summer, and we were on tour, you go when you're in Rome, you go on a tour, you go in one church after another. And so, just one of the first or second churches we went into, I'd already lost interest in churches after the first one, but now we're in the second one. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at the statues. Here's the statue of Moses. I see the horns. I was like, oh my God, this must be like a replica. And the guy goes, no, this is it. I think it's the San Vinoclo or something like that. Any of you ever been there to this church?
It's called St. Peter's and Chains because
Yeah, it's the same church.
because they take the chains that they had
That's right.
shackled Peter with
Right.
on display.
That's the same church. That's in the front on the bima. And then over on the side, there are these two big, you got that. There are these two big statues. In the middle is a smaller statue, although still very large, of Moses with the horns. We who know Hebrew, who don't translate the Bible incorrectly, like Michelangelo, or the translation Michelangelo was using, recognized that it doesn't mean horns, it means rays of light. Now, it's kind of an absurd translation, because why would you need a mask for glowing if you had horns? It doesn't make much sense. But anyway, that's what happened. So the question now, the point I wanted to make, though, on verse 29 is the words, Umoshe lo yada, and Moses did not know that he had these horns. Now, given that this Torah portion always comes out in and around Purim, if it's not the week of Purim, it's the week after Purim or the week before Purim, but it's always around Purim. What does that phrase, Umoshe lo yada, have anything to do with Purim? Anyone know? Does anyone know what the party is called that you're supposed to have on Purim? And in Israel, ever since 1948, you can go back and watch on YouTube some of the original parades that they had on Purim. They're amazing, these floats they used to have. The name of the party is called Ad Delo Yada. Ad Delo Yada. Anyone know what Ad Delo Yada has to do with Purim? You drink until you do not know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. And the way that's written in the Talmud is Ad Delo Yada. You drink to the point, actually, I think I brought it. If you look on the next page, at the very bottom of the page, from the tractate of Megillah in the Talmud, page 7b, Rava said, a person is obligated to become intoxicated with wine on Purim until he is so intoxicated that he does not know, which is ad delo yada. The duh, in Hebrew it would be ad shelo yada, but in Aramaic, the shin turns to a dalet. So instead of saying ad shelo, you say ad delo yada, until he did not know how to distinguish between aror Haman, cursed is Haman, Ubaruch Mordechai, and blessed is Mordechai. Okay, so, Rabbi Kahn, when he was doing his research on this, he said, okay, you could say it's a little bit, who cares? So on Purim, there's a famous phrase, lo yada, and in this Torah portion, there's lo yada, and that means, that this Torah portion purposely was set to go with Purim, even 2,000 years before Purim even existed, and okay, fine. But then you look up all the other places where it says ad lo yada or ad lo yada in the Torah, and you see how they all sort of come together, and it's very interesting, and we're going to get to that. But so far, all we've said is this. Moses, after the sin of the golden calf, goes up and has another conversation with God. And in that conversation, he wants to know something more about God than he already knows. I don't think any human can really understand that conversation. Why did Moses say he wanted to see God's face? How do we know that you can't see God's face? What's our proof? Raiders of the Lost Ark. You know that scene where they open the thing and Indiana Jones in his Talmudic wisdom says to Marion, don't look.
Turn away.
Don't look, because he was a Torah scholar. Everyone else looks, their faces get obliterated, whatever. Indiana Jones doesn't look and nothing happens. So from that, we know. From that, we know that you can't see God's face and live. So Moses wants to know something more. God says, I'm going to show you something more, but not as much as you think. Puts him in the rock, passes before him, and there's a result. By the way, so Moses then sees something in the aftermath. He sees God pass by, and the result is that Moses' face becomes radiant, so much so that when he comes back down, he's got to wear a veil. That's what we have so far. Now, the rabbis of the Midrash said, what happened exactly that caused his face to glow? And there's three ideas. Okay, so Kent, would you mind reading the first source on the sheet? Here's three ideas from Exodus Rabbah, which is just the Midrash on the Exodus.
Okay.
Not the ship, the book.
Exodus Rabbah, okay. And Moshe did not know that the rays illuminated the skin of his face. And from where did Moshe get rays of splendor? The rabbis say from the cave, as it says in Exodus 33:22, and it will be when my honor passes. Rabbi Barachia HaKohen says, in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, the tablets were 6 handbreadths in height and 6 handbreadths in length, and Moshe was holding them on 2 handbreadths, and the Shekhinah by 2 handbreadths, and there was 1 handbreadth in the middle, and from there Moshe got the rays of splendor. Rabbi Yehuda bar Nachman says, in the name of Rabbi Shimeon ben Lakish, Moshe was writing with a reed that had a bit left over, and he passed it on his head, and from that reed the rays of splendor were made, as it is written, and Moshe did not know that rays illuminated the skin of his face.
Okay, so the three ideas are, one, very simply, that's what happens when God passes by you. And from that moment in the cave, that's what happened. The other is this whole idea that just holding on to the middle of the 10 Commandments connected Moses with the Shekhinah, which means God's divine presence, and that's what led to the rays of splendor. And the final answer is that he got some ink on his face in the writing somehow. Either way, his face was beaming. Now, if you believe that it came from the 10 Commandments, from holding the 10 Commandments, or from the ink of it or whatever, then you have a problem, which Chizkuni from 12th century France is going to point out. And that is, well, if that's the case, why didn't his face shine the first time he got the 10 Commandments? It's an interesting question. Because the first time he got the 10 Commandments, and the first time he spoke to God, and whatever he saw, and he was up there for 40 days and 40 nights, and he probably saw some pretty cool stuff, but none of that caused his face to shine. But now, the second time, after the golden calf sin, something changes, and his face radiates. So you see the issue? Okay, so now let's try to come to an answer. So first Rashi, and then Chizkuni.
Okay. On Rashi, by the way, I don't know if Rashi was making a pun about or and or using aleph and ayin.
Oh, yeah, very good.
You know, anyway.
Yeah,
All right.
very good.
All right. That the skin of his face beamed. Karen is an expression connected with the word karnayim, horns, and the phrase Karen or, the light horned.
Right, so as Ken points out, or with an ayin means skin. But or, the same pronunciation, the same word, but with an aleph means light. So it's an interesting play on words there. Right.
The light horned is used here because light radiates from a point and projects like a horn. And whence Moses whence was Moses privileged to have the rays of glory? Our rabbis said that they originated at the time when he was in the cave. For the Holy One, blessed be he, then put his hand upon his face, as it is said in Exodus 33:22, and I will shelter thee with my hand.
Okay, this is a great lesson on Rashi. So the Midrash gives, Rashi's commentary is never his own words. I think 4 times in the whole Torah he says, here's what I think. But the rest of the time, he's just copying and pasting from the Midrash or the Talmud. But what does he do? So what we saw was the Midrash gives three choices of what it could be. Rashi picked one. So his commentary is, I'm not writing any of my own words, but I'm picking which words to put by the Torah and which words not to. So he's telling you, here's what I think. So when another rabbi will come and say Rashi's wrong, it's not so much that they're saying Rashi's wrong, it's that they're saying I prefer one of the other choices from the Midrash. Now, which is it? You know, so the point of the Midrash isn't to say which one is it actually. The point of the Midrash is to say these rabbis were making different points. What were they each trying to teach with the point that they were making? All right. Okay, now Chizkuni is gonna go in a different direction, and it's more interesting. So, Jeff, would you mind? The Chizkuni.
Moses was not aware that the skin of his face radiated light. When God had placed his hand on his face to shield him when his glory passed, and he stood in the opening of a cave in the rock, he merited this reminder of that encounter. The reason that he merited this reminder, which he had not merited when he carried the first set of tablets, was that the first set of tablets had been given publicly for everyone to see, whereas at the introduction to his ascent to receive the second set, the Torah had expressly warned that no one was to accompany him, even at the bottom of the mountain. Seeing that the giving of the first set of tablets was accompanied by so much publicity, if there had been no visible evidence that Moses had received a second set, some people might have thought that he himself had written on the tablets, seeing that the raw material had been taken up on the mountain with him also.
Right. So it's a very interesting idea. It's public relations. So the first time they did it, the first 10 Commandments was on Zoom. Right, there was an email. Everyone knew about it. The second one, he just went back up, and he needed some tangible proof that God was involved. Exactly. Very nice. So Chizkuni is saying you can take it or leave it. I'm not asking you to necessarily believe it because, like always, the video is it's grainy. It's hard to tell exactly what happened. But what he's saying is he needed some proof when he came back with the second set of tablets to show that God was involved. Otherwise, people would have said, you know what? You broke them, and maybe God's not with us anymore, and maybe this is you just trying to remember what God said, and how do we know that God wanted us to have another set of tablets? So he needed some proof. Ian, do you have a mic?
So we're talking about Moses trying to see the face of God because man was made in the image of God. But does man have to be the exact image of God, or is it conceptually that God gave man reason and a soul? And that's the image of God that we're talking about. And de facto, one knows that God is the most powerful thing in the universe. Perhaps the physical is not important. It is an energy source for the power to create all these things that God does. And he does not want him to see his face, God, because that astounding amount of energy in there would destroy him, Moses. And so all this discussion is assuming that since we are in the image of God, God is like us.
Right.
But no, the power and the force and the energy and all in this creator is different. It's the mind and the soul that's the image.
Yeah. So, you know what it reminds me of? You know, this idea of imitatio Deo, right? Imitation of God, that we're supposed to try to behave like God, which is obviously impossible. But that doesn't stop us from trying. Now, created in the image of God, it's kind of a different idea. I mean, what that means is that to be created in the image of God means, unlike the animals, first of all, when God said, let us create man in our image, he's talking to, according to Rashi, according to the tradition, he's talking to the angels. He's saying to the angels, we know the difference between what's right and what's wrong, unlike the animals, right? And I see this every morning, because every morning we wake up, I feed my dog and my 2 cats, and my dog eats her food, and the cats eat their food, and the cats leave some. And then I go back to my room and, get ready, and I hear the cat food falling onto the floor, and then the dog eating the rest of the cat food. And no matter how many times I've told her not to do that, she continues to do it. And that cat food is so expensive. And she just wastes it every morning. So they don't know the difference. Whereas my kids don't eat the cat food anymore. I've told them don't. No. Well, let me say one more. Well, sorry, was there another comment? Yeah, Roberta, you have a microphone?
So a comment and a question. Right, how do you follow that? A comment and a question. So God could have given him a lot of different signs, different signatures, different ways to DocuSign, but he did it through light and energy, which I find really great because like Passover from darkness to light, and that's our journey in life.
Okay.
So that was interesting, just an aside. But what is the teaching or the metaphor? Moses asked to see God's face, and nobody can see God's face. He didn't show him God's face. But the marker that he gave Moses, the PR tool, was through Moses' face.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what's the connection? I mean, it's blatant, it's right there, but is there like a drosh? Is there is there something about that? It's face to face, really. The ask was to see God's face.
Right.
But then the sign that God gave to Moses was through Moses' own face.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Very good point. Very good point. I mean, it's ironic. We're going to come to that. We're going to come to that. You know what? It's almost 9:40. I could start to give away some of the good stuff. All right. So when Moses begins to glow and come down the mountain, that's what the sign had to be. Because it's a rebuke. A rebuke. It's a rebuke of the Jewish people, well, most of them, because when they collected all of their gold and they gave it to Aaron, and Aaron threw that gold into the fire, it was something they were trying to create to replace Moses. And what happened? Out popped out of the fire gold. Right? Now, you would think from that imagery that something that is golden, that popped out of the fire, glows or radiates. And that's what they tried to create to replace Moses. And it was an abject failure, and it didn't work. So Moses comes down and saying, you want something that glows? You want something that radiates? I'm going to show you the real thing. My face. Right? And so that in and of itself is a rebuke of the sin. It's one way of looking. You wanted a drosh, that's a drosh. But why does what? Probably because it was too hard to look at for the average person. Probably it was, too much. Because when he would go inside and speak with God, he didn't need to wear it. But when it was around normal people, they couldn't handle it. But probably they got the message. And probably one of the reasons they couldn't handle it was because it was a reminder of their own behavior. Which nobody likes that. The imitatio Deo, what Ian was saying, it reminds me, when I was in Fort Myers, I had more free time there. So I used to take golf lessons. So golf lessons, when you give money to someone, and then they tell you what you can't do, but that you should do it even though you can't do it. So they put there's this computer screen, it's very technical. They put a picture of Tiger Woods and his swing, and then they put a video of my swing next to it. And they would say, you see how he does this? You don't do that. You see how he does this? You don't do that. So you see what he's doing here? Do that. So then no problem. So you go back in, you do it, videotape it, and it still looks like you. And no matter how much money you give this guy, you can't do it. You can't do it. That's imitatio Deo. So I started explaining to him. Yeah, I remember this guy I was taking lessons from was very religious. He wasn't Jewish, but the first time I met him, he said, what do you do for a living? Rabbi says, oh, I love the Lord. Okay, great. So at some point, I said to him, this is imitatio Deo. You want me to be like God, but I can't. He didn't get it. But all right, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. But I knew someday this is going to be good material for a Torah class. All right. So I thanked him for that. All right. One more comment, then let's move on, because we have a lot more to get to still. Please. Yeah, can you grab the mic, Bob? Oh, you have one. He has one. He has one.
The Torah portion talks
Give him
about...
two. Give him two. Oh, yeah, give him two. Okay. That's what I meant by he has one. Okay.
I've got two now.
You burned a couple calories.
For sure. The Torah portion talks about the radiance on Moses' face, but I don't recall, and I'm sure you'll correct me, that it again mentions Moses' radiance throughout the rest of Exodus before he dies. So you really don't know how long this condition lasted with Moses and whether or not he covered his face every time he spoke to the people.
Yeah, I think the implication is it's forever. But you're right. I mean, I don't know if the Gemara talks about that at all, but it indicates here that, he would wear the mask going forward. So, maybe at some point, the CDC said, you don't need masks anymore. And he said, all right, so, I don't know. Let's look at the Talmud, the back of the first page. Rabbi Simlai taught. Jeff, do you have a mic? You would. Rabbi Simlai taught. We don't need this whole Talmud, but I just want to take a look at a piece of it.
Rabbi Shammai taught, when Israel accorded precedence to the declaration, we will do, over the declaration, we will hear, 600,000 ministering angels came and tied 2 crowns to each, and every member of the Jewish people, one corresponding to we will do, and one corresponding to we will hear.
Okay, so let me just explain this for a moment. So You know, have you all heard this expression before, na'aseh v'nishma? The Jewish people at Mount Sinai said, we will do it and we will listen to it, implying that they would follow the Torah before they even realized what was in it, because they said, if it's from God, we want it. Whereas the Midrash says that when God was offering the Torah to all the other nations, he said to them, do you want to accept the Torah? And they said, what's in it? And then God told them, can't kill, no cheeseburgers. And they all said, forget it. But when it came to Israel, they said, since it's from you, we want it. So they were rewarded. And the reward was that 600 ministering angels came down and tied two crowns to each and every member of the Jewish people. Okay. Now, there were more Jews than that, but probably 600,000 heads of the households. Okay. Okay, and then when the people sinned.
Well, they only had 600,000 on Amazon, so
Right.
that's all he ordered. And when the people sinned with the golden calf, 1,200,000 angels of destruction descended and removed them from the people, as it is stated in the wake of the sin of the golden calf. And the children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments from Mount Horeb onward. Rabbi Hama, son of Rabbi Hanina, said, at Horeb they put on their ornaments, and at Horeb they removed them. The source for this is, at Horeb they put them on, as we have said. At Horeb they removed them, as it is written, and the children of Israel stripped themselves of the ornaments from Mount Horeb. Rabbi Yochanan said, and Moses merited all these crowns and took them.
Okay, so now there is an explanation of why more angels came back to take them than brought them, and I forget what the answer is. I heard it this week and I can't remember. I'll try to figure it out. But the point is, as Rabbi Yochanan said, and Moses merited all of these crowns and took them, and that's where the aura comes from. So in other words, at the golden calf, the Jews relinquished the light that they had, and all of that collective light went back and was stored up in Moses, and that's what caused him to glow. Okay, so it's another idea, but it also the reason of bringing this Talmud is not just to say that there's another idea. I mean, we already had 3 ideas from the Midrash. How many ideas do we have? Nobody exactly knows where the light came from. He came down with the light. But what it does point out is that the whole reason that Moses, the events that led to Moses glowing in the first place were the golden calf. And had it not been for the golden calf, there would never have been a need for Moses to have this glow later on. Okay, so what that means is Cheskuni offers a suggestion that you needed some proof that Moses was up there again, because God wasn't going to do revelation again. That was a one-time thing. But he had to get Moses another set of 10 commandments. Well, how do we know it was sanctioned? Because Moses came back with a glow. That's the Cheskuni. Rashi says, well, that's what happens when God passes before you and then you turn around and see God's back. You're naturally going to get all lit up. And that's naturally what happens. And okay, that's a good Rashi. But the Talmud comes and says, there is a collective glow to the Jewish people. And you don't see it on any one face, but when they're all together, it happens. But when they sinned at the golden calf, they lost it, and it needed somewhere to go. And so it went to Moses. Now, Moses having that is an indication that presence of God, because Moses was always with the Jewish people, that presence of God is still with the Jewish people. God didn't take it away from them. It's still there, and they can still access it by listening to Moses. But it's not as close to them as it was. It was on them, and now it's on him, and they have to go to him to get it. Okay, so you can take it or leave it, but that's what the Talmud is trying to say is the progression here. Now, there's an idea from the Zohar that we've talked about many times, which means you probably only Edward knows it. But he's good at these things. But we'll see. I'll tell you, maybe someone else knows it. God told Abraham the Jews would be slaves in Egypt for 400 years in Genesis. And he said eventually they're going to go out with great wealth and so forth, but they're only there after 210 years. And after 210 years, they leave. And the Zohar gives the reason why. Anybody remember what that reason is? Okay, I should have said Sherry instead. I meant Sherry and not Ed. Ed, you let me... he knew it. He wanted to give someone else a chance. All right, Sherry's exactly right. Now, why does the Talmud say specifically at that moment they had to leave? Because there are 50 gates or 50 levels of impurity. And the Jews were worshiping idols so much in Egypt that they had reached the 49th level of impurity. And if they had gone any further, they would no longer be recognizable as Jews, and that would be the end of Judaism. So God said, I was going to wait for 400 years. If I was a slave, I would have tried to reach the 49th level on the first day. Yeah. But I guess they didn't know that. So they get pulled out, and now, how long is it from Passover to Shavuot? 7 weeks. Right? Shavuot means weeks. 49 days. Right? Because each day wandering in the wilderness and being at one with God lowered them one level of tumah. So of tumah means impurity. So when they get to the 49th day, now they've reached back to 0. And now they're at 0. Then the next day is 50. They're finally pure. So the 50th day they can get the Torah. Because you can't get the Torah until you're pure. And so they needed 49 specific days in the, without idols anywhere near them and just with God in the wilderness to get the Torah. That's the Zohar. Kabbalah. Clear so far? Now, that means that on the 50th day, they left Egypt and got to Mount Sinai and got the Torah. This whole story of Ki Tisa is about what happened at Mount Sinai. Right? The story of the golden calf. Now, if you look now in Esther, I brought the verse, chapter 5, verse 14. There's a reference to 50. But there's a reference to 50 that never happens. Okay? You with me so far? It doesn't matter what yet. You don't have to read the verse. All I'm saying so far is that the Jewish people in Egypt reached 49. If they reached 50, there's no more Jews. Clear so far? If we reach 50, there's no more Jews. That's the end. God said, I got to get them out of there because if I reach 50, that's it. Now, in Purim, there's another 50, and if we reach 50, there's no more Jews. So look what it says. Then his wife Zeresh, and Zeresh is the wife of Haman. Don't scream. All right, gives me a headache. And all his friends said to him, let a stake be put up. How many cubits high? 50 cubits high. And in the morning, ask the king to have Mordechai impaled on it. Then you can go gaily with the king to the feast. The proposal pleased Haman, and he had the stake put up. Now, we basically reached the stage of, we in our day know what this is like. When the Jews are herded into a place and trapped and can't leave, and they're about to be marched to their death. That's Purim. It got to the very end. The stake is built, the 50th. We got to the point where Mordechai tears his clothes. He's sitting in sackcloth. All the Jews are fasting. Everybody's crying. It's a complete and total disaster. And the next day, the Jews are going to die on something having to do with 50. And then Esther saves the day, and the 50 never happens, and the Jews are saved. That's the connection that Ari Khan came up with. Probably got it from Rabbi Soloveitchik, who was his teacher, who got it from his teacher, who was Rabbi Soloveitchik, who got it from his teacher, who was Rabbi Okay. And from them, they probably got it from somewhere, too. Okay. So there's an interesting connection here in 3 ways. One is that this Torah portion always comes out during Purim, in and around Purim. 2 is something isn't known. Whether it's Moses not realizing, ad delo yada, there's no velo yada Moshe, Moses didn't know that his face was glowing. And we read in the Purim story, you're supposed to drink until you don't know the difference between Haman and Mordechai. By the way, you know what it says next in the Talmud after that? a rabbi did that, got really drunk, saw his friend, took out his sword, cut his friend's head off because he thought it was his enemy. And after that, they said, you know what, maybe we shouldn't drink so much. By the way, the story never happened because the guy comes and then takes his head and puts his back on his head and said, why'd you do that? But it's a warning after. It says, drink till you don't know the difference. It's an expression. It's an expression. Have a few drinks, but don't go crazy. And keep your swords at home on Purim. Okay. Now, the Imre Emet, who was the son of the Sfat Emet, who is an amazing life story. Imre Emet was one of the rabbis of the very famous Hasidic line called Ger, G-E-R, the Ger Hasidim, the son of the Sfat Emet. And in 1940, in Poland, he was one of the most sought-after rabbis by the Nazis because he was a very famous leader. They said up to 200,000 students. He escaped. A lot of his family was killed. His son was killed at Treblinka, but he escaped and arrived to Palestine and opened a yeshiva in Israel. And a very famous rabbi. So here's what he said. It is written in the Sfat Emet, meaning what he's saying is meaning my father wrote, that the 50th gate corresponds to that which is written, that they erected a tree with the heights of 50 cubits. So the Hasidim love Kabbalah. And so the Imre Emet, I'm not just saying that. The Imre Emet said, here's what I think. This 50th gate, 50 cubits high, this connects exactly to the 50th gate of Tumah, because the 50th gate of Tumah is the same, it's the same result, which is the end of the Jewish people. So you could never get to the 50th gate. Now, I would say it this way. Well, this is how I learned it. There is no 50th gate. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as the 50th gate. So what's the 50th gate of impurity? The 50th gate is that if the Jewish people in Egypt would have stayed there any longer, they would be unrecognizable as Jews, and that would be the end of the Jews. The 50th cubit on Purim is that the last Jew in the world is hung by Haman and his helpers on the gallows in Shushan, and that's the end of the Jews. And so the way we look at it is, there's no such thing as the 50th gate because God would never allow the 50th gate to come into existence. It couldn't exist. Clear so far? Okay. Now, so that's everything that Rabbi Kahn said that I learned from him. But now I want to add one more piece that I think is my idea, and I think this is how it fits into the story of the golden calf. And I think here's something we can learn from this. And what we can learn from this is, what does it mean for a Jew to become a better person? Okay, so, you could say, well, do more mitzvahs. Okay, but you're commanded to do those anyway. So are you really any better? You're just doing what you're supposed to be doing. Maybe you're not worse, but I don't know if you're better. But, so better is not doing what you're supposed to do. Better, I think, is improvement. And improvement usually comes from finding what you're not good at and getting better at it. Okay, I mean, that's not rocket science, right? You've heard the word improvement before. So, when I said in the beginning that the Jewish people who worship the golden calf, other than the 3,000 ringleaders who built the golden calf and who are killed because of it, everyone else is forgiven. Not only are they forgiven, they get the Ten Commandments again. Moses comes down with this glow. It's clear that it's been sanctioned with God, and they're still on a direction to go to Israel. There is no repercussion. It's as if it never happened. Okay. Now, when Moses comes down with the second set of tablets, it's a very special day. Has anyone ever heard that before? Okay, let me show you. If you look on the last source, Rashi on Exodus 32:1, It tells you everything that happened and the date that it happened. And let's see who's the first one who could tell me what the very special day is. On the 7th of Sivan, Moses went up the mountain. On the 17th of Tammuz, the tablets were broken. On the 18th, he burned the golden calf and judged the transgressors, which means they died. On the 19th, he went up for 40 days and pleaded for mercy. On the 1st of Elul, he went up to receive the second tablets and was there for 40 days. On the 10th of Tishrei, God restored his goodwill with the Jewish people gladly and wholeheartedly, saying to Moses, I have forgiven as you ask, and gave him the second tablets. When did Moses come down with the second tablets? No? Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur. What happens on Yom Kippur? Your sins are as if they never happened. Your sins are as if they've never happened. They're forgotten. They're gone. The story of the golden calf is the story of tshuva. It's a story of there is no repercussion. Now, you could say, what about the 3,000 who built it? The 3,000 who built it separated from God and said, we have no relationship with God anymore. This God is dead. Everyone else sinned. They violated the second commandment. They created a statue. But when Aaron, this is what I explained last night, when Aaron said to them, tomorrow will be a feast for the Lord, not for the golden calf, for the Lord, they all said, yeah, we're in for that. So they didn't separate from God. They were just confused and scared and thought that Moses was dead. Which all that is a sin, but not a sin that they deserve the death penalty for. The people who died, they, by the way, committed the 3 cardinal sins. They worshipped an idol. They killed Hur, who was the son of Miriam when he tried to stop them. That's rabbinic, but it's what happened. You never see Hur again, so you wonder what happened to him. They killed him, and they also committed adultery, which is mentioned in the Torah. The word litzachek means they went out and they were having like an orgy of sorts. And so those are the 3 cardinal sins. So they died. By the way, those are the same 3 cardinal sins that the people of Sodom and Gomorrah were doing when they were wiped out, and the people during the flood when they were wiped out. And that's what happens if you do those 3 horrible sins. Don't kill people, commit adultery, and worship an idol on the same day, and you've got a better chance of survival. But if you do those 3, you've taken your fate into your own hands. So I think the story, all of this is this. Moses comes down with the glow, and he's not sure why. Right? Is everyone clear on that? He doesn't know why. We relate this to Purim, and we get to a point where we're not sure if we're supposed to bless or we're supposed to curse. Okay? Now, the Jewish people at the beginning of Purim, what did they do wrong? Haman says there's a group of people among you who are disconnected and are scattered all over your land. And Esther says, Kenos, bring the Jews together. That's the only way we're going to be saved, is if you bring all the Jews together, because they were disconnected. And so there was something wrong, but then they fixed it. And when they fixed it, they were saved. And we forget about Haman. We drink so much that we don't even know who he is. Let me say it one more time. You with me so far? There's a sin. The sin is fixed. Once the sin is fixed, it's as if the sin never happened and you forget about it. So Moses comes down and he didn't know something. He didn't know. And I think what it means is the thing with the golden calf, he was over it. It's as if it never happened. Why? Because he comes down on Yom Kippur. And what happens on Yom Kippur, if you look what it says here, I have forgiven as you ask. Moses asked God to forgive the Jewish people, and now they're forgiven. Well, in order to be forgiven, what do we do on Yom Kippur? We come and say we're sorry, but we say one other thing. We're not going to do it again. So once you get from the point to you've committed a sin, you've said you're not going to do it, and then you're committed to never doing it again, only at that point, it's forgotten. Lo yada. It's as if I don't even know about it. It never happened. And so the story of the golden calf, it's not to me so much a story of the sin that the Jews committed. Remember, there's no repercussion. For the people who stuck with God, there's no repercussions. What is there? There's a guy who was so mad at them that he shattered the 10 Commandments, who then later on says, it's as if it never happened. I don't even know about it anymore. I've forgiven. I asked God to forgive you. God's forgiven you. It's Yom Kippur. It's as if it's never happened. So, I think in the final analysis, and this is how it can help our lives, we all have these weaknesses. We all have these sins that we do. Improvement for a Jew. How do we get better as Jews? I mean, that's what we should always be trying to do. How do we get better? We all have weaknesses. I have weaknesses. Even me. I mean, I don't know what they are. We all have, that's a sin in and of itself. We all have weaknesses, even me, right? Even all of us. When you can get to the point where you wouldn't even be tempted, like you wouldn't even consider doing that sin, it wouldn't even occur to you that that's something that would tempt you, then you've done Yom Kippur the right way. And so like let's say you're, a gambler, and you can't stop. And over time, you've been able to fix it. And you get to the point where, you have a chance to gamble, and you wouldn't even consider it. It's not something that you would even, it doesn't interest you anymore. You've grown past it. That's true forgiveness. And what's true forgiveness? You've forgotten about it. So I always tell people, when you pass away and you go to God, you're going to have like a conversation. And they're going to ask you about your sins, and you're going to say, I didn't do that. But then they're going to show you a video. And they're going to say, what happened here? But the videos that they have of you, of us, for the things that you've overcome and you don't do those anymore, they burn those. You don't have to worry. We forgot about it as if it doesn't exist. So the whole story of the final calf and the final analysis, everyone always calls it the Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf. But the final analysis is the rectification comes when Moses comes down with the new tablets on Yom Kippur and says, you remember that thing with the golden calf? I've forgotten about that. We don't have to worry about that anymore. But don't worry. We got plenty other sins down the road to deal with as well. All right, Shabbat Shalom.